Hello and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Krista Johnson. I'm our Senior Director of Special Programs here at Ametros. Today I'm going to walk you through MSA self-administration, those 5 critical things you need to know as you administer your Medicare Set Aside. Okay, so our agenda today and those key takeaways. We're going to do a high-level review of Medicare Secondary Payer and Medicare Set Asides. We're also going to talk about those 5 critical things you need to know as you manage your Medicare Set Aside. And then finally, we're going to close out with resources available to you to assist you in properly managing your MSA. Okay, so you are about to settle your workers' compensation case, or you have just settled and you've elected to self-administer. So you're probably asking yourself, now what? These are very common questions that we receive when a claimant reaches out to us and understanding what their obligation may be. So you may be asking yourself, what is an MSA? Why do I have an MSA? Can I lose my Medicare benefits? And especially, how do I report this MSA? These are all great questions. And by the end of the presentation today, you'll have a basic understanding of what your responsibility is going forward. But before we get started, it may be helpful to have a brief understanding of why you have a Medicare Set Aside in the first place. Okay, so Medicare is a secondary payer. May sound confusing, so let's walk through it. So what is Medicare Secondary Payer? Well, the Medicare Secondary Payer Act was created by the Omnibus Reconciliation Act of 1980 and then enacted by Congress in 1981, with the whole intent of reducing Medicare's disbursements on cases where another primary payer is responsible. So what this did is it resulted in Medicare not being responsible to pay for a healthcare claim when another entity is responsible for paying before Medicare. So think of this entity as an insurance carrier for a workers' compensation or liability settlement, or even another group health plan. So on July 23rd, 2001, CMS issued a directive memo. It's called the Patel Memo, indicating that Medicare's interest must be taken into consideration for a workers' compensation case. That terminology is quite important and perhaps something you've even heard of before. This is true for current Medicare beneficiaries, as well as those with a reasonable expectation of becoming a Medicare beneficiary in the future. So what does a reasonable expectation mean? That is if you are believed to become a Medicare beneficiary within 30 months of your settlement date. So how does Medicare take their interest into consideration? That's by way of a Medicare Set Aside. So what is a Medicare Set Aside and why do I have one? Well, Medicare Set-Asides are reports that outline and calculate the future Medicare-covered medical for an injured person over their remaining lifetime. There is the Workers' Compensation MSA guidelines available in the reference guide for how these allocations should be created and when CMS recommends them as a suggested tool to comply with the MSP Act. We will go over that document in just a moment, but there is a standard process for CMS or the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services that they have outlined to provide guidance on how these MSAs should be allocated. Your MSA report is going to include quite a bit of information. It's going to cover your diagnoses, your pre-existing conditions, a narrative describing what the injury may be, and summarizing what your 2 years of medical records are. Also outlining what your future treatment may be, such as your provider visits or therapies, surgeries, your supplies and prescriptions. So maybe you need a wheelchair or you have prosthetics. All of your injury-related medical will be listed out in this MSA allocation. So there are 3 primary goals for a Medicare Set-Aside. The first being of most importance to you, and that's protecting your future Medicare benefits. Secondly, to protect Medicare's interest and that Medicare trust fund. And finally, to follow CMS policy. So before we get started on those 5 critical things to know when you're self-administering your MSA, here are a few examples of people that contacted Ametros and some of the questions that they had. So going through a few of these. I got hurt on the job a few years back and had to set up an account. I didn't know what to do, so I've never touched it. Is there someone who can go over my file and see if I can take some of the money out without being penalized? Or I'm receiving a workers' comp settlement. I am on Medicare and SSD. Will all of the settlement go into one account? Will I be able to use this money for anything else, such as housing or maybe to fix my car? What will happen if I do use it for something else? Please advise, no one has told me anything. These are very common questions, and we'll certainly review them in a moment. Okay, so let's get started with those 5 critical things that you need to know as you manage your medical funds. First, being of most importance, are these important documents shown here? If you forget everything else from today's presentation, I urge you to really pay attention to these 3 documents. They will help you as you manage your future medical funds. So first here being your Medicare and You handbook. This is a 124-page document published each year to give insight into what is covered by Medicare. This will be a valuable tool for you in identifying what is injury related, what's Medicare covered, and that way you can also know if you have any related treatment, but it's not Medicare covered, how you need to handle it. Second, here we have the self-administration toolkit. This is your most important document. 31 pages. It's published by CMS to provide you guidance on how to actually administer your MSA and the requirements that CMS expects through the life of your MSA. Lastly, here we have the Workers' Compensation Medicare Set Aside Arrangement Reference Guide. This is the guide I mentioned a little bit earlier in today's presentation, but it's also provided by CMS and indicates how entities and MSA vendors should take Medicare's interest into consideration and how to properly allocate for that MSA. Another question that we get a lot is, how will Medicare even know I have a settlement? Well, this is due to Section 111. These Section 111 filings are required by the insurance carriers so that Medicare knows they are not primary payer, and they are then taking that secondary payer obligation. So remember to save these documents for the lifetime of your MSA. They do get updated with changes from time to time, so you will need to monitor as new versions become available. Okay, so the second critical thing you need to know is how to administer your MSA. First, you need to deposit the MSA funds into an interest-bearing account. However, these funds cannot be commingled with any of your other money. So if you are receiving other funding from your settlement, or if you already have money in the bank, you absolutely cannot put the MSA funding with anything else. If you have any difficulty with doing this, please reach out after today's presentation. Ametros Radius Banking is a completely free of charge bank account with a quick setup process to help you properly follow this requirement. Once you've set up your bank account, you then need to notify your healthcare providers. This also means your pharmacy. It's very important that they're billing the correct party. So once you've notified your healthcare providers and your pharmacy, you can begin seeking treatment. It is important to confirm that it is injury related, it is Medicare covered, and that accurate coding for injury related expenses are being included. It's also important that the appropriate fee schedule has been applied. Once you have started to receive your bills, if you do not have enough funds to pay the healthcare provider, it's very important that you send in your attestation to CMS, notifying them of exhaustion. If the workers' comp MSA can cover the provided treatment, go ahead and pay the healthcare provider. Keep complete records for the annual attestation or the exhaustion, whichever comes first. So expanding on those requirements, here you're going to see what those CMS guidelines are and some common issues we often hear about. So the CMS guideline is to place those funds into a separate interest-bearing bank account. Oftentimes, those funds get commingled with other funds. CMS also requires that you identify those treatments or the prescriptions that they're related to your injury and they are Medicare covered. A common issue is that those funds are oftentimes used for unrelated treatments or even non-Medicare covered items. CMS guidelines also require that you pay bills according to the specific workers' compensation fee schedule or the usual and customary rates, whichever apply in your state. Providers typically will overbill, and the claimant is typically unaware of the right fee schedule rates. So it's important to do your research and know that before you pay a bill. Also, CMS requires that you keep track of all your expenses, your treatment, your dates of service, any of those related ICD-9 or 10 codes that we mentioned earlier, and also submit annually to CMS. The common issue here is that oftentimes no reporting is ever completed or submitted. Lastly here, this is something we haven't really touched on yet, but it's also important to know. Taxes on interest accrued from the MSA can be paid out of the MSA account. But a common issue that we see is that an individual's full tax liability is incorrectly paid out of the MSA. If these guidelines for the Medicare Set Aside are not followed properly, Medicare benefits could be jeopardized. Next up, the third critical thing you need to know about managing your future medical funds is the coordination of your Medicare benefits along with your MSA. So if you ever exhaust your funds in the MSA entirely or in any given year, it is important to have coverage for your healthcare needs. This is also true for your general healthcare as well. So let's go through the different parts of Medicare quickly. Part A, we have hospital insurance. So we're talking institutional services at a hospital, a skilled nursing facility, or hospice. This is available without a premium if you're a fully enrolled beneficiary. Part B is medical insurance. So we're talking about professional services. If you're going to your doctor, your physician, you have DME or outpatient hospital services. Part B is available with a premium. Part C, we're talking about Medicare Advantage plans, and that'll be important here in just a moment. But these are offered by private insurance companies that include Part A and Part B. There is a completely separate enrollment for this type of coverage. Then we have Part D, your prescription drug coverage. Prescription drugs can be covered outside of hospital stays. So if you're in the hospital, that will be covered under your Part A. There's a completely separate enrollment for this type of coverage as well. So if you do not have separate private health insurance coverage, be sure to enroll into Medicare plans that you will need. If your MSA funds exhaust, you will need to be enrolled into a Part D plan to cover your prescriptions. So in October of 2019, CMS published a new version of the reference guide. As we mentioned a moment ago, this is about Medicare Advantage plans, that Part C coverage. And in 4.1.3, other healthcare coverage, this is what CMS said. A workers' comp MSA is still recommended when you have coverage through other private health insurance, the Veterans Administration, or Medicare Advantage, Part C. Other coverage can be canceled, or you could elect not to use such a plan. A workers' comp MSA is primary to the Medicare Advantage plan and must be exhausted before using Part C benefits on your workers' comp injury or illness. So what you see here on the right is an actual letter that a claimant received from the subrogation unit at Humana regarding their Medicare Advantage plan. This is important to know because subrogation units are looking closely to ensure that Medicare is still remaining a secondary payer. So the number 4 critical thing to know is about submission of your annual attestation. You followed all the steps of self-administering your account as we discussed a moment ago. So what does that annual reporting look like? On the left here is a sample for your annual accounting letter that will be sent along with your reporting. It includes supporting documentation showing those ICD-9 or 10 codes that we mentioned, those dates of service, your payments, and all the items that you have been tracking. The temporary exhaustion sample letter here on the right indicates to CMS that your MSA has been spent along with a transaction record showing proper documentation, and that Medicare will need to become primary until your next annuity is received. This slide here shows a sample transaction record necessary for reporting your MSA expenses. Upkeep of this record is extremely important and helpful for you. Tracking and reporting all of your expenses must occur annually, or if the funds exhaust in any given year. So it is helpful to keep all of this information in one place, along with your supporting documentation. So shown here, you will see the required attestations you will need to submit to CMS. This occurs annually within 30 days of the settlement date or when the account temporarily depletes or exhausts, even if it is mid-year. You can submit these via paper-based faxing, you can mail to the specific CMS unit, or you can also register for an account on the Workers' Comp MSA portal to report your attestations. As you can see on this document, you are notifying CMS of what is falling under Part A, that hospital insurance that we discussed a moment ago, or Part B, those medical expenses. And you're also separating out the cost of your prescriptions annually. Keep a copy because they will not send anything back. By signing this form, you are acknowledging that you are taking Medicare's interest into consideration, and that if you falsify the document, that Medicare has the right to deny coverage for injury-related treatment up to the full amount of your settlement. Also, there is a note here notifying you that CMS has the right to audit your annual attestation at any time. And it is recommended that you keep these records for a period of 7 years for each attestation. So organization of all of your supporting documentation will be key in the case of an audit. So the last critical item to know is that you have resources available to you for administering your MSA. If you're feeling overwhelmed and you're not sure you want to take on this responsibility entirely on your own, there are tools available to help you navigate the proper administration of your medical funds. To help us walk through these options, let's first speak through an actual case Demetrius received on a call recently. So here we have Jim. Jim was catastrophically injured working as a millwright. He has been in the workers' compensation system for quite some time, and he needs approximately $12,000 annually in his medical care. So he sees multiple specialists, he takes prescription medications, and he also has periodic physical therapy. Jim had elected to settle his case after years of treatment, which included a self-administered Medicare Set Aside. So what are Jim's options? He could choose self-administration, which he did. He can reference that CMS 31-page self-administration toolkit we discussed at the very beginning of today's presentation. And then he basically became self-pay. He can secure a copy of his stated medical fee schedule. He has to negotiate those rates with his providers on his medical costs, or he could have chosen professional administration. Let's go through what that looks like a little bit further. Okay, so shown here is a sample transaction record for Jim. He had a neurologist appointment, a pain management appointment, he had some prescriptions, and needed to get a wheelchair. He needed to provide a variety of information: the dates of service, his method of payment, who it was payable to, the description with the corresponding ICD-9 or 10 codes, the payable amount, and the balance after paying each one of these providers. So Jim identified 3 difficulties. First being keeping track of each transaction. Second, identifying if the provider was even billing the appropriate codes. And third, the most difficult part was negotiating to the fee schedule in his state every time he received a bill. This caused him great frustration, so we wanted to know how Demetrius could help. We advised him of the available tools that can help make his life much easier, regardless of which option he chose. So the first tool that was explained to Jim is the self-administration tool, Amethyst. As you see over here to the left is the Amethyst card. It looks like a traditional insurance card, and it's a card that Jim will present anytime he goes to his provider, he goes to his pharmacy, and it will act as a traditional insurance card. So this is what you can use in the case you don't want professional administration. Amethyst still offers you that savings and support that Jim was looking for. So the funds will remain in your chosen bank account. You also have access to savings on your medical expenses. That's up to 21% of savings. So it means your funds are going to last longer. Those templates, they're available there to assist you in your required reporting for your MSA. You still stay in control of your funds. You have access to our expertise and resources in case you need help. And then you also have access to an online member portal. You can log in, view your account transactions at any time, and it keeps it organized for you in the case of a future audit. So if Jim decided that self-administration was just too frustrating for him, he still has the ability to use a professional administration tool like CareGuard. This is a concierge level of service for managing your future medical funds. So we handle everything. You never have to touch a bill or keep track of your funds. You never have to negotiate with your providers either. We will establish a bank account for the future medical care and act as the custodian, but you are still the owner of that account. We will receive your bills, we'll pay them on your behalf. You can also achieve savings up to 62% on your provider bills and 28% on other medical expenses. We handle all of your coordination of care. We handle all of that annual reporting on your MSA to CMS so that we're ensuring compliance, and it's something you do not have to worry about. You also have access to the online portal so you can review your account at any time. So in 2017, CMS added to the Workers' Comp MSA reference guide that they highly recommend professional administration. A few years later, they expanded to add another recommendation for the use of professional administration, where a claimant is frequently taking controlled substances. Remember that this reference guide occasionally gets updated. Okay, so those key takeaways for those 5 critical things you need to know for administering your MSA are those important documents in the Medicare and You Handbook, the Self-Administration Toolkit, and the Workers' Comp MSA Reference Guide. Remember to check for those updates. Second, requirements for administering your account outlined in that self-administration toolkit. Don't forget about the interest-bearing account that needs to be separate. Third, remember to coordinate your Medicare coverage with your MSA and your other healthcare needs. 4, keep complete records and remember to submit that annual attestation. And 5, finally, please remember that there are available tools and resources here to assist you. If you have questions about today's presentation or you're looking for additional assistance, please contact us at marketing@amitros.com. Thank you again for joining us today.